Okay, so in this chapter we are going to get started by creating our materials and our shaders. So yeah, the next few chapters will be all about texturing basically. So we are going to get started by first just creating one material, and it will be our tiles material. And I got like a few extra reference images as you can see over here. And we are basically just going to make a combination between this, but these are floor tiles. I want to have like wall tiles. So we will do that, and we will do then like a combination of what you can see over here. With like just a little bit of everything basically. And also I added some reference for like some really nice concrete, which we can also use. So the way that you should imagine this is the tiles are going to be like on these type of pieces, and over here on like our on the side of our walls and everything. So they're all just going to be tiled. And then we also have our plaster that you can see over here, for example. And that's what I just want to have on like the walls and everything like that. And the shaders will take care of most of the damage. So let's just go ahead and dive right in. We are going to get started by creating one type of tile, and then we will also make a few variations of it, like a dirty variation, damage variation, stuff like that, so that we can blend between them. This will break up the tiling, and it will just increase the quality level of our environment. So, knowing that, let's go ahead and we will be using Substance Designer for this, especially for tiles. It is the easiest way. Now, one thing that I have is in your textures folder, you can find a Marmoset toolbag scene that is called Material Render over here. And it is basically like a very easy default render inside of Marmoset toolbag for your materials. If you want to know how to actually set up this entire scene, which does take like 20 minutes or something like that, you can go to my YouTube channel over here on Fast Track Tutorials. And if you just go ahead and find the video creating a high quality material render using Marmoset toolbag 4, then you can learn how to like set up a render like this and get like really nice material renders just like you can see over here. So that's just something, but we will just be using it for like a quick previewing, because I do not like to preview inside of Designer myself, because I don't have enough control over the lighting. Anyway, let's go ahead and create a new scene. So new substance graph. I'm gonna just go for metallic roughness, and I'm going to call these wall underscore tiles, because we will also have like a floor tiles later on most likely. So let's go ahead and press OK. And I'm just going to go ahead and get rid of my 3D view over here. As I said before, I don't need it. I do not need the metallic height. I'm not sure how well for example parallax will work with our shader, but we can make it for now. So these are basically going to be our inputs. Now for our tiles, we are going to go ahead and first of all start with the height map. Then we will go over to the norm map. Then we will go over to the base color, roughness, and all of the other maps. As you can see for our tiles, I want to go for a design that is, and this design is working quite well. That's a nice thing. Like, of course, Naughty Dog already did a lot of testing for me, so I quite like going for like some squarish tiles. So that will probably be something like this over here. I think that will work quite well. So knowing that, we are first going to create our tile shape and also the grout in between, and then we are going to add damages to our tiles. So for that, if you go to your patterns, we can probably get started with like a very simple tile generator over here. You can use a tile sampler, but that one is more expensive and it probably does not really make a big difference. So let's use the tile generator. And then you want to first of all get started and decide how many tiles you want per square feet. Now, I often like to go for 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, so they are quite large. Here, like a 4x4 seems quite fine. So if I tile this, yeah, that should work fine. So let's just go 4x4 over here. Next, what we want to do is we want to go ahead and we want to set the pattern back to a simple square. And then what you need to do in order to see it is you need to go down to your size and just tone the size down a little bit. See? And now you can decide how much grout you want to have in between your tiles. You can see that tiles often do not have a lot of grout in between them. Okay, here they do. But just in general, they do not have a lot. And also if you look at the things up here, you can see also like it's just quite thin. Don't know if I have more. Here you can also see like some tiles and stuff like that. So we are going to go ahead and set this probably to 0.99. Yeah, let's get started with 0.99 over here, so that we have like a little bit of crowd. Now we are going to just add some general variation to this. If you go ahead and let's not do a scale random. I do not assume that these tiles would have different scales. All we want to do is we want to add damage that has been created like when the building got abandoned. It's like weathering damage, it's like slight edge damage, stuff like that. This also means that we do not really need to do anything with positioning. You could, for your rotation, maybe set your rotation random super low, like 0.001. And it will just give you like the tiniest bit of like a rotation, which from like a distance, it will just make everything feel a little bit more incorrect. So that's one that you can do. Now over here you have your luminance random. You can normally use this, but I actually like to use a different technique. So let's say that I now have this. So these tiles, they do not need a lot of damages. I'm going to probably do like 2 or 3 different damage passes. The first one is by doing a multi-directional warp grayscale. And you can just see me pressing space and I just type it in. This is how I always work in Designer. I always just press space because I know the names out of my head. And I just type them in here. So multi-directional warp grayscale over here. And what I like to do is I like to go ahead and have my tile generator in the input. And if we then go ahead and just double click on it, I'm going to set my mode to minimum. This will mean that this will ignore anything that is black. And I'm going to set my directions to 1 or maybe 2. Then if we go into our noises and just grab a quick purlin noise over here, this will, when we plug this in, you will see that we give it like some general variation. Let me just see how 2 directions work. Here, see 2 directions not good because then it will try to like overlap. So we basically just have this one. You can change the angle to give it like a general angle. And then what you want to do is you just want to start by setting the scale down quite a bit. Over here, or yeah, down. So to like around 5. And then if we go into the intensity, I'm gonna go ahead and just set this like, I don't know, 7 maybe. And this will just give us like some very slight variations and unevenness in our tiles, which I think will work quite nicely. Now, the next one that I want to try is actually a new one. So I'm not sure if it will work great before we add all of our slope variation, but it's a new technique that I've recently learned because I always used to use a little bit more of an outdated technique. And basically the way that this works is you kind of like want to mask the edges. So you want to get started by, for example, doing an edge detect. And if you then set the edge roundness down, I basically want to mask out my edges roughly where I want to have my damage. So you will see what I mean. So what I can do is I have my edge detect and I set my edge width lower. And then if I blend this along with my original and set my blending mode to, let's see. Because oh no wait, I probably need to invert this. Do I need to invert? Yeah, I need to invert grayscale, my original over here. Because basically I want to just mask out those black areas. Like this. So now you can see that now we have like a little bit of control over where we want to have our edges. Now, what I can do with this is I can grab a noise. Let's say we do like a B&W spots 2 or 3. Let's do 2, because 2 always looks nice and sharp. Then let's add something called a histogram scan node. And this allows me to basically have like control over the position and give it like more contrast. And you can also play around over here with like your contrast to make it sharper or less sharp. And then the general idea is this. So you have your edges. You basically use them as a mask. So if we go ahead and we use them using a blend. I don't know if I need to invert it. Let me just quickly see. Let's see, blending mode. Yeah, here, see, I need to invert this. Let me just quickly do an invert grayscale in between here. As I said, it's a new technique. I'm also still remembering it. So that now I get something like this. So, okay, so I got my edges over here. And I set my blending mode basically to multiply. That should do the trick. Yeah, multiply. So you just want to leave with like a few edges over here. So now, this is the areas where we will have like damages and everything. So I can go into my histogram scan and I can play around with my position to basically add more or less edge damage. So that's quite nice. Now, once I've done this, what I can do is I want to do a blur, high quality grayscale over here. And if I just go ahead and set the intensity down, I just want to give this like quite a bit of a blur, as you can see over here, so that the edges do not look as sharp. And let me just find like a nice area to look at. And now if you add a non-uniform blur grayscale to this, and actually plug this one into your blur map, and if you go down here and set your multi-directional warp grayscale into your gray map, you get like this effect that you can see over here. And I believe that if I set my blades down to 1, I believe, I get like this really interesting edge damage effect. You can also set the blades to more to get like a softer effect, as you can see over here. But as you can see, so and maybe set the samples also not too high. You can see if you set your samples up, it will give you more direction because you can change the angle. So you kind of just want to set your samples down to maybe like 5 should be fine. And yeah, you can kind of like choose what you want to do with your angle. I'm just going to set my angle to like a little bit to the side. And then for the rest we can choose our intensity, and this should give us like some edge damages. Now, as I said before, let's just have a look, because we might want to add our slopes in front of it. If you add a normal node and set this to OpenGL, here we can see the edge damages. See? So this is a technique that I recently learned. I forgot where I learned it, so sorry for that I cannot give credit to the person that taught me this. But I saw it in like a random node. But here, this is quite cool. So normally what I would do is I would normally use which I can also add on top of this if you want, is a slope blur grayscale. And if you then grab like a moisture noise on top of this, you can then set your samples all the way up, your mode to minimum, and then your intensity down, and then you get like a slightly different style of blur over here, see? Or style of damage. So if you set your intensity to like 0.01, for example, 0.1, here you can see that you get like, again, a slightly different damage. And then I would blend this with like multiple different masks to kind of like get roughly the same effect. But this effect goes a little bit quicker. So we got some damage over here. We can kind of like play around with it later on. Here, let's see if I do like my samples. Yeah, I think I do want to stick with like 5 samples. Sometimes it might be nice if you actually use your blades more. Yeah, because it does give me like a few extra directions. And then yeah, the only thing that's a little bit annoying is that your angle is always like a slightly different angle. But okay, that's fine. So now that we've done this, what I want to do is I want to add some slope variation. As I said before, I did not like doing that into my tile generator. Instead, what I like to do is I like to add a flat fill node, which is one of my favorite nodes. And I basically grab... should I grab this one? No, the flat fill basically can only see black or white. Well, yes, the flat fill can only see black or white. So these kind of damages it cannot see. So I probably want to grab the one before we add our damages. And this is what I mean. I don't know exactly where I'm going to place this. But flat fill, it will convert your nodes into positional data. So what I can do then is I can use nodes like flat fill to gradient or flat fill to random grayscale. Here if we add those, flat fill to random grayscale also. This is super cool. So the random grayscale is the same as like adding random luminosity. And if something is white in your height map, it will stand out. If something is black, it will go inwards. So doing this, we can have our tiles and give them a very slight height difference. Our flat fill to grayscale, if we go ahead and turn on angle variation, it will give every single tile a random angle. So if we do this at very low levels, we can give very slight sloping. This is great for floor tiles, but even for wall tiles, I'm going to give it like the tiniest bit of like a slope, because I think that will look nice. So having these two nodes, I believe that I can just add them after this. And the reason why I'm like thinking about this is because I might lose some details if I'm not careful. So I'm going to add a blend. I'm going to start by plugging in my flat fill to random grayscale over here. And I want to basically set this one probably to like a multiply. And there, here, you can see that it keeps my damages. And tone the opacity way down. This is just going to be like a very slight variation. And we can look inside of Marmoset after this to make sure that it looks correct or not. Then we can add another blend and plug in our flood fill to gradient. Multiply. And then, once again, play around a little bit more with your opacity. And you can then see that you get like some slopes. It might be very difficult to see, but it is there. Here, if I turn on my opacity, you can see that the slopes work a bit better. Okay, perfect. So we got this stuff right now. Now what I'm going to do is, I probably want to like give this a tiny bit of smoothing. Let's add a blur high quality grayscale in front of it. And just set the intensity like super low, like 0.05. Just to give it, okay, maybe a little bit more, 0.07. To give it like the tiniest bit of like a slope. Then we add our damages, and then in the end, here you can see that everything will look a little bit softer. So our tiles will have more of like a look that you can see over here. By the way, one thing that you can also do is you can also play around with the roundness, as you can see over here. This is pretty cool, and a general trick that I use for this is I use this at like the very beginning. Remember how we did this edge detect node? Now with this edge detect, as you can see, is we can basically control the roundness. So if we just play around with our edge width and set this to 0, I can set my roundness, and based upon that, I can give some of my tiles like a round corner. Now, you can imagine if you would simply have, for example, these round corners, you don't want to have them everywhere. But what you can do is you can add a very simple blend. You can blend basically your edge detect along with your original one. And then all you need is you need a flood fill. Ooh, I'm not, let's see, so if I'm using this one, I think I will have to just duplicate the flood fill. The flood fill is a little bit expensive, but it's not that incredibly bad. So I just want to plug in my original in my flood fill over here. And when I say expensive, I mean the milliseconds over here. But it doesn't really matter because we are not going to use this as a real-time material. You then set this to a flood fill to random grayscale to give it like some randomization. And then if you add a histogram select, you can basically select based upon gradients. You do this by setting your contrast all the way up. Your range will control how many you want to have selected. And then you can do your position as like a randomization. So I can just basically mess around with this until I get a selection that I like. And simply plug this into my mask. And now you can see some of these are round, other ones are square. And you can basically just mess around with this and get whatever you want. So that's also quite a nice technique. If I guess I will show you, I will not be showing you all of these little small details later on, because then the tutorial would be too big. But I guess another thing that you could do is you could use your tile generator, and then you could go down here and set the luminance random all the way up, or almost all the way up, and then add like a histogram scan on top of it and push the position all the way up. And then what you can do is you can use this into your histogram select. So as you can see, that saves you if you want to make your material cheaper. You can see that now I am only using around 1.3 milliseconds instead of 31 or 32 milliseconds. So this is another way that you can do it. But it's Substance. Like in Substance, there are so many ways to do small stuff like this that it is very difficult for me to literally show you every single technique, because there are 10 ways for the same thing. Anyway, if we now get to the end, we got these basic tiles. We can already just have a look at this. Let's save our scene. Plug in our normal slot into our normal over here. And plug in the actual height map slot into your height. And while we are here, let's add an ambient occlusion and grab the RTAO, which is Ray Trace Ambient Occlusion. It is a bit slower, but it gives you a much nicer effect. And when I say a bit, I mean a lot. But it doesn't matter because it's the very last node, so it doesn't actually need to do a lot of work. But I can go in here and I can give it like, see here, some really nice looking AO. Just like that, so I'm quite happy with that. Okay, done. Now what we are going to do is we are going to make a folder called Final in our wall tiles. And let's call these ones tiles underscore clean, because we are also going to make a tiles underscore dirty version later on. And then to export them, just right click on your wall tiles, export outputs as bitmap, final, clean, select folder. I always export as a TGA file or Targa file. And I always turn on automatic exports when outputs change. And what this will do is it will make sure that whenever you make a change to your graph, it will export. So we can press export outputs and it will just export into the background. I am already working in 4K. If your PC is not very strong, you can always go down here in the properties and set this to be 2K, for example. But if we, for example, now go quickly in here, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to, here, let's add some safety frames, 1 second. You will learn how to do this inside of like the tutorial, but it's basically setting your outputs to be a square size and then turning on your save frames in your camera. There we go, that gives me like a nicer look. I can now create a new material, fresh start, and call this wall tiles underscore clean. Plug this in here. And what we want is we want to have a displacement, we want to have a normal, and we want to have a, down here, ambient occlusion. We then plug in our normal map. We can plug in our height map into the displacement. And we can plug in our AO map into our ambient occlusion. And even without the base color, it just makes it a bit easier to see. As you can see, right now our height is really strong. And by the way, the reason I can show my height is because I have my subdivisions up really high. So right now my height is quite strong, and you can see that it has like different height variants. If I would go ahead and I would go in here, I can, for example, increase my tilting a little bit more. Because I know that my height is going to be very soft, but then it will automatically update, and then you should be able, if I just, for example, tick this on and off to reload it, here, see, you can see that the tilting has changed. I can then play around with my scale. Now, right now I have like a huge amount. I have like 24 million polys. I could go one subdivision lower, and then my sliders will respond a little bit quicker. Or you can turn off ray tracing in render, and then they also respond quicker. So here you can see that now, here they already work quite well. If I turn off ray tracing temporarily, you can see that then they work instant. So I like to sometimes do that where I turn off ray tracing, I figure out my height, and then I turn it on again. And now you can see that here are our base tiles. I can go to texture and tile my texture twice just to give me a slightly better look. And this is already like a very solid start. So having this in our next chapter, we are just going to continue, add a few more norm map variations. And once that is done, we are going to get started with like our base color and our roughness, which will also carry a lot of like the dirtiness and everything. So let's save this scene also, and let's continue to our next chapter.